second. What's up? What's up? All right. I don't have my sidekick, my business partner Chana here today. So he usually does the countdown. He's the professional one when it comes to the intros. So he's in the car driving right now. So it's just gonna be us. And maybe I'll do some kind of Q&A today. Because I don't have a bunch of topics, but we like to do these podcasts on a regular basis. So we're gonna continue. What's up, everyone? Yeah. What's up to my wife? By the way, that's Angela, not Reverend Slim. Is it soon yet? Yes, yes. What's going on? Michael Squires, Wendell B. How's it going? Yeah, we should just do kind of like a Q&A, you know? Ask me anything, and we'll just keep going like that. Yeah. Because I don't have any particular topics. I've been pretty busy. Yesterday. I did a calibration for somebody for their car, and I've been working on a video for that. Yeah, it's a BMW 128, and it's pretty tricky just because of where the mid ranges are installed on that. So that's something I was working on yesterday, and I'll have a video for that later on, maybe today, tomorrow. I just posted one today from my buddy Paul here. What's up, Paul? He interviewed me at Cedia, talking about Magic Beans and the spatial audio calibration toolkit. So that was cool to finally have a video. I didn't record anything at Cedia. Just wanted to be there, talk to people, and not really, I guess, work. You know what I mean? Because recording all these videos at these events is real work. You got to go, try to talk to everybody, film. I used to actually edit the same night and release the videos the next day or that day. So yeah, just wanted to kind of hang out this time. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, leave them here. Home theater questions, hi-fi questions, car audio, calibration. I'm here for it. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do with this. Got this Trinov booklet here, and it's pretty cool. They actually have some Atmos demos, and the thing that I thought was cool about this, look at cool little USB card thing. It's 32 gigs here, and it has a bunch of demos here. Maybe I should send this out to somebody. I threw all these on the Plex, and what I thought was interesting. Thank you, Andy B. What I thought was interesting was they have versions that are Atmos, DTS, and Oro 3D. So I got a chance to kind of compare them, and there were definitely some differences in how they sound. Yeah, definitely differences in how they sounded. And I don't know what to attribute that to specifically, if it's the actual format or when you're making content for Atmos or Oro or DTS, they have different, different tools, different renderers. So you could actually try to do the same exact thing, and I think the outcome when you export it is going to sound a bit different on each. And I did notice that. Like, I was talking to Slim about this in our after show. We have an after show chat and just kind of comparing notes. And the biggest thing that I noticed was the Atmos stuff sounded more discreet. Like, you could hear a sound specific, like it's almost like locked into a speaker. Whereas the other ones, that same exact sound may span more speakers. So might, instead of using it, let's say, only on the surround, might be on the front speaker, the surround, maybe one of the height speakers, things like that. It just sounded like that sound, that specific object, was larger. I don't know if it would sound like that on every single system, but kind of a interesting takeaway. Oh. Let's see. Scruff Kingman says, I wonder if the roll-offs are different on each. I know what you're talking about, and this is this is actually a good topic. We've been noticing that there are lots of I don't know. There's a base roll-off on a lot of the content that is on, I would say, some of the streaming services. I don't know what exactly, if it's exclusive to Netflix or Disney Plus, or if it's on physical media also. But there is something called BEQ, base EQ, and people try to restore the bass, and it's a tricky thing because we don't really know. We don't really know what the intended sound was. If somebody did cut something off at 35 hertz, which is not good if you have a home theater that can go down to 20 hertz or below, yeah, you definitely want to hear that sound. And this is kind of anecdotal, but I went to, what was that? Shang-Chi? I think that was the name. Yeah, I went to watch that movie in a theater. We kind of had like a private party where we were able to rent out the theater, and it was just for us. And I brought my binaural mics just to record some of the scenes. And when that movie came out later on what is it, Disney Plus, I was like, man, there's just not as much bass. Like, there's just not as much. Right. And I applied BEQ because on my HTP1 processor, there's a way to easily just pick out a movie. Shout out to the folks who make those corrections. I don't know, those settings for BEQ, let's just say. They analyze the movie and then they try to find out where it rolls off and try to restore it. So anyway, I applied that on that particular movie, and it sounded way more similar to the experience at the actual theater. And I think the good thing is that I recorded it, right? So I didn't have to go and try to remember if it had more bass. It actually, from the recording, definitely had more bass. So anyway, I think he's asking if the roll-offs are different on each. I don't know that there's there's nothing that says Atmos has to roll off, Atmos and DTS and all those can play as low as you probably want it to go. So I don't think it has to do with the format specifically. I think it might be that some of these companies are optimizing maybe more for a sound bar or TV speakers or your phone. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me why they'd cut off at 35 hertz or wherever they're cutting off, because I think that, if you have a sound bar, those companies should be the ones that are limiting the output. It shouldn't be limited from the movies, because if your system can't play low enough, I think it should be able to, the content should have it in there. So anyway, Reverend Slim says, I wonder if the DTS X version might sound different if you disable the neural processing and let it be channel based. I don't know. I kind of assumed that it was going, that it was native DTS. So I don't know that it would do upmixing in that case. I don't know. I wasn't paying close attention. Stephen Mitchell, thoughts on Odyssey A1 Evo Neuron? No, I actually haven't tried it yet. For a while, I didn't have a Denon installed on my on a home theater, but now that I have it, I should really try it because people are saying that they're getting good results with it. So that's always a good thing, I know a lot of people are looking to save money. Some of the room correction software can be pretty expensive, when you're looking at Dirac and upgrading. Let's say if you have an older Denon or Marantz and you can't, use Dirac, then you want to get the most out of it. A lot of people are saying that they're getting good results with this Odyssey A1 Evo. I should say A1 Evo Neuron. It's not Odyssey. But yeah, it looks like it's doing some cool stuff. So yeah. And we actually do have a export on Magic Beans, so people can use a target curve that Magic Beans figures out. So yeah, I really should try it, but I just haven't gotten a chance to. Let's think people are still talking about the bass roll off. Is it per service? I think this is a Reverend Slim question. He knows a lot about this stuff. I don't know if it's per service. Scruff Kingman says, I think with streaming, they do dynamic range cut off up and down for bandwidth. Yeah, possibly. Paul says, is there a plan or benefit of creating speaker profile in MB since so many may be able to report their speaker model and brand? You know what? That's an interesting thought. I know that Onkyo kind of does something similar because they're part of the Vox, or I don't know what the group is, Pack Vox, I don't know. So they do have settings for Klipsch speakers since they do have the measurements for them, and it'll correct those speakers to sound, I guess, more accurate. I also haven't tested that, but I think that's kind of interesting. That's interesting because if you think about it, a lot of people will say if you buy a speaker, you know, you want it to sound like the speaker, right? Like that's why you bought it. But if you think about it, like they're still correcting that speaker because they have access to DSP. And I think that's kind of an admission that you can make a speaker sound better. Like this is from the manufacturer. They're applying a correction to the speaker. So I don't know exactly how they do it, but I'm a firm believer that you can take a passive speaker that is pretty good and make it better with DSP. If you have a speaker that has really, really good directivity, then you can really make that speaker a lot better, assuming that it isn't already good. So a lot of times the speakers that have great directivity also have a very good frequency response on axis. So there's often not a lot of things to fix, but the reason why we don't have profiles in Magic Beans is because sometimes there's manufacturer variation, right, from one speaker to another. You might find that, you know, yours actually measures differently. We've found that sometimes manufacturers may change some components. And so a measurement that was done prior on a Clipple, something like that, may not actually apply to the speaker that you have. So it's a little bit tricky when it comes to that sort of stuff. Also, when you take a speaker and you look at the anechoic measurements, but then you put that in your room and put it behind an acoustic transparent screen, for example, for in-wall speakers. Well, it almost doesn't apply. Any of those anechoic measurements, I want to be careful about what I say. Some of the measurements from the anechoic measurements will not apply because there's a screen in front of the speaker, which really changes the high frequencies specifically. And I think that if that's the way that your system is set up, you need to account for the thing. So, you know, the technical term is in situ, like in the actual place where they're at. I believe in measuring like that. A lot of times you'll get a speaker. So we do a lot of calibrations, or we see a lot of calibrations from people in our Magic Beans Discord group. And one guy, he has some nice per listen in-wall speakers. Right? What are they? They are the R5Is from per listen. Yeah, R5ILR. Nice in-wall speakers. And we're taking a look at some of the measurements, and they don't exactly measure the same as what per listen has on their website, which I'm not saying is not reliable, but the fact that he does have them installed, one of the left speakers, the left speaker is near a wall. The right speaker is near another wall. The center is not. And then he has a cabinet underneath. Those things do affect the direct sound. They also affect the sound at your listening position, but they definitely affect the direct sound, which means that anechoic sound, I don't know that somebody will ever hear that in that particular situation, because the nearby reflections are already affecting the sound of that speaker. So I should talk to Dan Romer. I got the chance to talk to him at Cedia. I have his number. I'm name dropping, but yeah, he's one of my favorite guys to talk to there, just because we're talking very on a technical basis about a lot of the speaker design, stuff like that. I would like to show him the measurements and ask him what he thinks of them and see, you know, he might disagree. He might say, you know what, anechoic is the most important thing, or he might say what I'm saying here. Right? Let's see here. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying, Croson, is that I'm a believer of taking actual measurements. And with Magic Beans, we're taking a near field measurement and main listening position measurement. So we're getting an idea of what the speaker is doing. What is the direct sound of that speaker, right? And just to kind of go into it a little bit more, in a car, you know, sometimes there's measurements of the driver, right? So in my car, there's you know, the mid-range drivers are in the dash, and they face up towards the windshield, right? So the direct sound, right? The sound that's coming from that speaker, an anechoic clipple measurement of that driver. Do I ever get to hear that? Not really, because the windshield is like a few inches away from that thing. So the sound that I get to hear is always a reflected sound, right? Unless I were to put my ear somewhere in between that driver and the windshield, pretty much I'm always hearing a reflected sound. So I think it's important to take a measurement of that. Let me see if there are any other questions I can answer here. I should try to buy a movie on Apple and then watch it on streaming service, then switch back and forth. Yeah, you can do that. The other thing that you'll notice is if you search for BEQ, for bass EQ, they have a database, and what they try to do is they analyze the entire movie, right? And you'll see that sometimes they'll analyze a movie that's on physical disc, another one that is a streamed version of it, and they will have a different bass roll off. So you can actually just look at it from the measurements of the movies. Wendell says, Joe, I have multi-QX and Magic Beans. Do I need Dirac art? Well, Magic Beans is it's an add-on, right? It does something specific, which is find the target curve that you can use with something like multi-QX. You can use it with Dirac art. It's not a replacement for those things. So do I need Dirac art? I would say, first of all, how does it sound with multi-QX, right? If you're happy with how it sounds, cool. The one thing that multi-QX does not do, that Dirac Live Bass Control, so the one that's right before art, Dirac Live Bass Control can manage multiple subs, and it can make the sound more similar at each seat. And that's not something that multi-QX can do. Now, if you have a mini DSP and you're using something like multi-sub optimizer, then you can calibrate those subs independently and make it sound more similar. So as far as bass, you can kind of get it to sound more similar to what Dirac Live Bass Control does. But Dirac art, or I should even go back to Dirac Live. So Dirac Live, there's Dirac Live Bass Control, Dirac art. Right? If you just even look at Dirac Live, it does phase linearization that is very difficult to do, right? Very difficult. And what that enables it to do is it can align the phase almost, I would say almost full range, right? Pretty much full range. And that's difficult to do, right? So Dirac can do that. Multi-QX cannot. Now the question is, do I need Dirac art? Dirac art takes that to the next level. The way I like to think of Dirac art is, let's just put it this way. When it comes to bass, there's always issues in a room because of the length of the waves. And a lot of people, they'll put up like huge, physical things, right? Physical bass traps to absorb some of the bass. So that's one option, but they're huge, right? Another option that I've seen prior is people make these things that are active bass traps, which kind of look like, they just kind of look like speakers. Like they kind of look like subs that can cancel out the sub frequencies. Now the difference is with something, let me just go to Trinnov waveforming. So Trinnov waveforming actually uses other subs to do what we're talking about. Cancels out some of the unwanted bass frequencies. Now, what does Dirac Art do? I was a beta tester for that, and Dirac Art, I think, tries to do the same exact thing, except it's using all of your other speakers to support that. So that's a little bit tricky. Do you have full range speakers? Most people don't, right? You may have speakers that can go down to 80 hertz, right? So you might get support down to 80 hertz, right? But what about the bass that's below that? And so a question that I would like to ask Dirac is, do the other subs, let's say you have 4 subs, do the other subs support one another when it comes to the bass in the time domain, right? So Dirac Live Bass Control, it makes it so they support one another in the frequency domain. They also are phase aligned and level matched so that you get better seat-to-seat consistency, right? That's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, do the subs in Dirac Art, do they make it so the decay time is lower? So I have to get clear on that. I should call these guys at Dirac and figure out the answer to that. MW says that yes, Art does do time domain. The question for me would be, does it do it using the subs, or does it rely on the main speakers to do it? So I don't want to misspeak, so I need to ask them specifically about that. I have asked someone at Sound United, and they did give me an answer, but I also want to double check. Right? I'm just gonna keep going down this list. Scruff Kingman says, I went to an Arendelle LCR setup. Then I'll get a random sub and rear surrounds for 5.1. It's a good choice. Michael Squire says being able to save the near field scan of each speaker would do the same thing, though we've talked about that before. So we're jumping all over the place. I'm just going to go down the list of comments here as they come in. Yeah, Scruff Kingman says yes, crossover is shipment. One may be different, made later or before. Yes, and we've seen this. I've seen this in the Polk Audio Reserve series, where I measured them when they first came out. Aaron got a later batch, and we're like, these aren't even close. Like, what's going on here? So it happens. Okay. Ryan G says, hey, that's me with the per listen speakers. Yes, Ryan G. We're working intensely to try to figure all these things out. And I think that's pretty cool, right? You know, we have a community of guys that are pretty knowledgeable in our Magic Beans Discord, and we're all in there trying to just help each other out. We're all learning. You know, I don't think at any point does anybody know everything, right? So I was talking to Anthony Grimani, another name drop. Talked to him for about 2 hours, and I was showing him some stuff in REW, some stuff that I do, and I think he's like, oh, you know, at a certain point, he's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I think we're going to always learn from each other. And if at any point you feel like you know everything, then I think that's the point where it's not fun anymore. Let's see here. F1 coming out to 4K disc on the 7th of October. I like that movie a lot. That's another one. I watched that in the theater. Listened to it over streaming, and the bass did not sound the same. Yeah. And someone can say, oh, yeah, maybe it's the way that you have your bass rise. I don't think it's that. Joe says, if looking at BEQ catalog, Atmos, True HD, physical media, Atmos Dolby Digital Plus equals lossy streaming. Yes, this is correct. BB Photo says, I have Dirac Live in my mini DSP, CDSP, 8x12 Dirac Live car audio processor. It's pretty impressive, but takes some experimentation to implement properly to get a good result. BB Photo, one question I'd have for you is, in car audio, there's a mid bass null that happens, right? I think people who have done it are familiar with that. How does Dirac address that? Right, because in home audio, we don't really have that specific issue, right? If you align the left to, a certain phase response, linear phase response, and the right to the same thing, then what you get when you're listening is good sound. I'm kind of curious how it arrives at the proper conclusion, or does it have an issue with that? No? Let's see here. Okay, MW, I think he's referring back to our conversation about art, and he says, yes, using subs and mains, you can pick exactly which support. Okay. And to that, MW, when I was beta testing it, I remember that you could set the support for each group, right? So let's say front, left, and right. You could say, oh, I want it to support up to this frequency. I think right now it's set to a hard number of 150 hertz as a maximum. Before there was not a limit, and then you'd set the lower limits for example. Now, based on what we're talking about, I think you'd have to have. I'm just trying to remember if the sub group had that option. So let me know. He says waveforming is just subs up to 120 hertz. If you have enough subs, art is up to 150 hertz, no matter how many subs. All right. All right. Ryan G says, thank you. Yeah, appreciate all the discussion in the Discord. Yeah, man. Yeah, we have fun. I told him, hey, you're a smart guy, because he picked some very good speakers. And when it comes to Magic Beans, I think the whole point is try to make a speaker sound as good as that speaker can possibly sound. But realistically, if you start with great speakers, it helps a lot, right? There are definitely some speakers that we can try to EQ to the best of, the best we can do with DSP. And still, there's certain aspects of the speaker that you can't control. You can't control directivity. You can't control maybe how loud you can play it before it starts to distort. These are all physical characteristics that we're not in control of, but we try to do the best we can with the stuff that we have. All right, let's keep going down the list. Wendell says, I do have 4 subs. I did a recent new calibration, pretty happy with the result. MW says, I'm correct. You can select the frequency and also how much they support. I think when art comes out for, more of these brands, and it's out in the mainstream, not just exclusive to people with Storm Audio, I think we're going to have a lot of questions, because people already have questions about Dirac Live, and I think that that's pretty simple to set up. So I'm curious to see how it's going to go with Dirac Art. I hope they made it a lot simpler, but we'll have to wait and see. You do have to do a lot of measurements with it. I think one of the requirements was that you had to choose as many measurement points, right? And, sometimes they'll ask you, how many points do you want to measure? I think you have to do the number of speakers that you have plus one more position. So it's a lot. Let's see here. What does BB Photo say? He says, Joe and Tell, you need to set crossovers to try to avoid the issue, and sometimes use a front subwoofer to bridge the gap between mid-bass, door cancellation, and the main subwoofer. Okay. But I guess my question was, the Dirac Live, did it fix that issue? Or did it get it wrong? Right? Without adding any new stuff. John Spence says, I recently got into proper theater systems, and I ended up getting a full 5.1.4 system. It's an Integra DRX 3.4 and Klipsch reference 5.1.4 pack. No towers. What's the best upgrade, towers or sub? Okay. What I would say is a second sub is probably the best way to go. if you were to look at how to improve a sound system, and you had to put it in order, right? From highest priority to lowest priority, and best bang for your buck on top to lowest bang for your buck. I would say best bang for your buck would be to change out the cables. I'm just kidding. Adding subs, right? Making the bass response as smooth as possible, making sure that you're not in a null, right? Things like that. And that's what multiple subs can do, is not just add more bass, but it can actually make it so that you have a smoother bass response, right? So what's the use of a sub that can go down to 15 hertz if you have a huge null at, at 50, right? You're just not hearing those sounds. So I think adding more subs is definitely a good way to go. Adding towers, I know a lot of people like to use towers in their system just because, I mean, for me, they look pretty cool to have some floor standing speakers. I don't know in a home theater that it's even that necessary. In a 2-channel setup where you may not use a sub, you're gonna definitely benefit from getting a floor standing speaker compared to a bookshelf speaker. But if we're talking about using subs to handle the bass, I don't know that they matter as much until we start talking about Dirac art. And with Dirac art, it would be beneficial to have towers, for every single speaker, towers for your height speakers, just because you'll get more support from these other speakers. But other than that, yeah, definitely adding another sub would be my pick. And followed by EQ. Good calibration would be the next step. And then see how you feel about it. If you feel like you want towers for whatever reason, then yeah, you can still get those. Ole. How to integrate subs with mains, like what to adjust on the AVR and look for. Oof. Now we can go. That'll be a whole lesson. And by the way, I think it would be cool to do some courses. After coming back from CEDIA, I realized I thought the calibrators would know more, but a lot of times they just they'll get somebody from Trinov if they set up a Trinov, and that person will go and calibrate the system. And they may just do basic stuff, right? Run the calibration the way that anybody else would run it. So I think it'd be cool to maybe do some more advanced courses for anybody who's interested in that. I think the result would be that more people would get better calibrations. So let me see. What can I say about this? Integrating the subs with mains. If you have multiple subs, the number one thing is to make sure that the subs themselves are not fighting each other, right? Why would they fight each other? Because they're out of phase, right? And the tricky thing is, it's not just a matter of like turning the phase knob, right? Sometimes you might have subs that are in phase with each other, but then because of the room, maybe where you're located, it's possible, and this is how it is in my living room, they're aligned from certain frequency range, and then below it, they go out of phase with each other. So what are you supposed to do about that? The answer is an all-pass filter, but you can't really do all-pass filters on an AVR manually, but something like Dirac Live Bass Control, I think it should do that. It should fix that area and get the subs to align. If you don't have Dirac Live Bass Control, then you can use a mini DSP, and that does have all-pass filters. But it becomes tricky because you have to know what to measure in order to figure out where to place the all-pass filter, what the Q of the all-pass filter is. So it gets kind of tricky, but the idea is just to get all of your subs phase aligned, right? Then the next step would be to phase align the sub with the main speakers, right? So that means finding a good crossover point where your main speakers are playing as low as they can, but still not playing too much where they'll reach distortion when you turn it up. And then, yeah, figuring out that crossover point and making sure that the sub blends with the mains and they sum, right? You don't want them crossing over and then have a dip. You want them to sum and not have a peak either, right? You want them to sum and create a smooth line between them. So yeah, and then from there you get them all phase aligned to your mains, and then the next thing would be to get it level matched so that it matches your intended target curve, right? So that's a mistake I've seen a lot of people make. They come up with a target curve, and then if you just rely on something like Odyssey or Dirac to match that target curve, sometimes it doesn't always do it, right? Most of the time it's pretty close, but you probably want to go in there and measure the response. So what we do with Magic Beans is we'll have something called the post EQ sub-alignment feature, and we'll tell somebody to play pink noise out of their left speaker, for example. And let's have bass control, bass management on. So let's say it crosses over 80 hertz, and now the sub takes over. And what we want to do is, with those two combined, does it match the target curve, right? So sometimes you have to turn the sub up and down for it to match the target curve properly. So that's it. Hopefully that answers a little bit. Try to do it quickly. MW says Dirac owns the most significant patents in regards to phase, so they have the most potential to correct phase. Okay. I'll take your word on that. And I think this is referring to Art again, minimum 3, but recommended 9 or above. Are you sure that it's not the number of speakers plus 1? Because I talked to the guys at Dirac at Cedia, and they said there's a reason why it needs to do that number. Mathematically, they need to use that amount. So, what's up, Eric Albert? Maverlath, I'm sure you've answered this a million times. What's the deal with wattage on subwoofers and amplifiers? I see crazy numbers, 3,000 watts, 4,000 watts, but from what I understand, a 15 amp outlet only. I guess it depends on the manufacturer, right? Some manufacturers are pretty good about their wattage ratings. What we, of course, care about is what is a sustained RMS output. And so for a sub, you just want it to be able to play a bass note at a certain SPL for as long as you want it, right? It can't just be a spike, right? So that when you see a peak number, that just means that maybe they have some capacitors in the amplifier that are storing energy, right? And then when it needs that spike, it'll take it from the capacitor, and that's how they're able to get around, the limitation of the amp outlet, right? I don't think that's a solid number that they should rely on. But yeah, with multi-channel amplifiers, though, what you start to see is maybe some manufacturers aren't giving ratings based on all of the channels driven. Like they'll give you a number based on one speaker being driven. But what happens when you have all of the channels loaded and they're all playing sound? Can it hit that number? So yeah, I would say when it comes to amps, just look for known manufacturers. Find stuff that has been measured on Audio Science Review or from Aaron. Try to find reliable data. So BB Photo, this is regarding the Dirac Live in the car. He says Dirac Live tries, but it can't completely correct it. Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Smash the like button. Yes, thank you, Eric Albert. So yeah, BB Photo says you can't really get around an acoustic or physical null. Yeah, this is true. This is true. So I'm just kind of wondering what it tries to do. Because there definitely are some tricks that you can use in car audio that kind of help with that. I've seen, I don't want to give away all my tricks, but there are some tricks. John Spence says, should I get the same sub or a different one? I think it's easier to just get the same sub as long as that sub is good, though. Right? If your sub doesn't play very low, what I think you should get a sub that can play reliably down to 20 hertz. And if your sub can do that, yeah, get multiple of that same sub. Right? I mean, that's a simplified version. Of course, you want to get one that has the amount of output that you need given the size of your room and how far you are. So yeah, you don't want to get multiple of a sub that doesn't perform well. It'd be better to ditch that sub and upgrade to a better sub that does have great performance, and then go from there. Then get multiple of that better sub. Okay, BB Photo Says it depends on how wide or the bandwidth of the null. If it's narrow, we don't really perceive it very well anyway, but a wide null is problematic. And so I was referring specifically to that near side null, which is usually a pretty wide and obviously perceptible null. MW, generally adjust the phase measure, repeat until max output at the crossover. Okay. And then he mentions Open Sound Meter or Smart. Yeah, Smart is a paid app. Open Sound Meter is a free app if it's on a desktop. If you get the same thing on mobile like iOS or iPad, then it is paid. I have a paid version just because I think it's super cool. And what it is a dual FFT measurement system, which is different from what REW does. REW takes a measurement based on sweeps and pink noise, things like that. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't do real-time measurements when it comes to phase and impulse response. So you can do a real-time measurement of frequency response in REW using the RTA function. But if you want to get live phase trace and live impulse response, then you need something like these two softwares that they're called dual FFT. All right. So I personally use the JL Audio Max, and they have the Tune software on there. And what that does is it's comparing the measurement that the mic is taking from the known signal that it's putting out. Right? So it knows the signal, it knows the time delay between putting out that signal and when the mic should receive it. And so, yeah, I think it's very useful to look at apps like this or programs that do dual FFT if you really want to do stuff when it comes to phase alignment, very accurate time alignment. You know, I think it's awesome for that stuff. Especially for a car, you really need it. Okay, Reverend Slim is responding to Maverlath, says amplifiers typically have power rails and capacitors that let them exceed the draw from the circuit, especially for transient bursts of sound. Nothing would need sustained wattage that long. Okay. OA says, have you ever compared the mic included in the AVR versus the U mic for Dirac? Is it worth the upgrade? I kind of have. One second. Yeah, I have. So I have compared the mic that comes with Odyssey, you know, little tower mic, and that they have an automatic calibration for those. Whenever you plug those in, they have a just kind of like a set curve. And what I wanted to do is I wanted someone to be able to use that mic with Magic Beans. So we had to actually extract and figure out what that curve is, the correction curve for that mic is. So someone could use that. Now, not a lot of people use it, but I just thought it was a cool idea. Compared to a U mic, most U mics are just out of the box more accurate, right? Each one, you know, they're batch calibrated, right? So they will sound, from my experience, they'll be more accurate than that Odyssey mic with no calibration, right? With calibration, I think that the U mic would be more accurate. Is it important for use with Dirac? I don't know. I mean, I would buy it for a different reason, right? I would buy it because you can use a U mic with REW and really get in there and figure a lot of things out. You can use it with Magic Beans, and you know, it's just I don't think it's ever bad to get a U mic. Right? As far as it giving you a better, I don't know that it'd do a better calibration if you were just to run Dirac. Maybe it might give you a better calibration. I would say I haven't tested the two in Dirac, but I always think it's worth it to have a U mic. Alberto says Rebel F226 versus Per Listen 5T. I would have to look at the measurements on those. You know, the number one measurement that I look at is how linear is the directivity. Is it like a really straight line? Which way am I going? Straight line. And then it really depends on other things. Do you like the way they look? How loud can they play without distortion? And do you need it to play that loud? You know, I think these are both companies, Revel and Perlisten. A lot of their designs are based on good measurements, good psychoacoustic theory. So I don't know that you could go wrong with either one. You know, I would add Kef into the mix. Kef also makes great speakers, and they're consistent. They consistently make good speakers, which tells me that the designers know what they're doing. They're not just getting lucky. But yeah, you'd have to take a look at some measurements. Maybe ask Aaron. I think he's probably measured those too. Big Jack says some amps have good capacitors that can handle most notes. Others operate on 240 volt as well. There you go. Ole says, dang. So then my question becomes, will Magic Beans and the toolkit be everything needed for calibration? No, I think that those are complements, right? They complement a good correction system like Dirac, right? I don't think the intention when I came up with Magic Beans was ever to replace Dirac. You know, they're already doing a great job. So there's no need to try to do what they already do extremely well, right? I wanted it to do something that I don't think they do as well as it should, which is come up with the correct target curves. Josh says, hi, Joe. Do you have a contact at Dirac? I want to know if Dirac Art will ever come to RCAM AV30. Even if I did, I don't think they would tell me. You know, it's one of those things like with software, right? Like they never tell you when the exact date is because I don't know that they know. You know, BB Photo, in car audio, the near side null is due to the distance between the midwoofers and the front doors. Many people use a small front subwoofer in passenger footwell so we can raise the crossover of the mid bass. Okay. This also helps to remove the extra mid-bass energy from the doors for less resonance and rattles. Yep. Can't disagree with you on any of those points. MW says the problem with Dirac and mic is you cannot change the mic settings such as crest factor to Dirac. Works with the mic better. Okay. Not sure what to say about that. BB Photo, we typically get a plus 10 dB to plus 20 dB SPL gain due to boundary loading with a subwoofer firing into the firewall of passenger footwell, thanks to having double power just to get 3 dB. All right. BB Photo's dropping knowledge over here. Wendell says, I only have 2 seats. Would multiple measurements still need to be done? Well, yeah. I mean, it's always good to have more measurements. It's, you know, I know you're saying you have 2 seats. How often is somebody in that other seat? That's a question, because I have 4 seats and I'm almost always listening or watching movies by myself. So that's something to be considered. If you always have somebody in the other seat, then yeah, it's probably a good idea to measure at multiple seats, right? I'm not sure if you're referring to Magic Beans, but the idea with that measuring at multiple seats is, first of all, measuring in different locations makes it so that the auto correction doesn't automatically overcorrect in the high frequencies, because high frequencies, like, you just move a little bit and the sound changes, right? So you can imagine a mic that's just a small capsule. It's going to take the measurement right where it's at, right? But then if you were to move that mic just slightly, it's going to get a different response, especially in the high frequencies. And so by measuring at multiple locations, it doesn't try to overcorrect, right? So that's the reason behind that. And also for the bass too, right? For the bass, you can move a foot over and you could be in a null in one location and not in another. So, you know, more data is better. But the thing to keep in mind is when you optimize for one location, it makes it, well, if you optimize for multiple locations, it makes it less good for a single location. For the most part, like if we're to look at time alignment, right? Something as simple as that. If you time align to a specific seat, then, you know, it's optimized for you, right? I don't know that Dirac or the others time align for multiple seats. I don't know if it takes those things into consideration. Most of the time alignment is based on a single position, Because how do you time align to multiple positions? Like you're just gonna screw it up for the main seat to make it, I guess, sound okay for the other seats. But my point just being, it's always a compromise, right? When you start calibrating for multiple seats, if you want it to sound more even at the other seats, then you're compromising a single seat, and that's always the case. Big Jack says, "Screw them other seats." Okay. MW says, "I don't think art will come to AVR 30 because it needs more compute and more taps." I think does the AVR 30, does it have 4 sub outs? Does it have multiple subwoofer outputs? Because I know that was the limitation for the Denon and Marantz products. Right? It needed 4 individual sub outputs. OA says, "Is there a vid about Magic Beans versus correction software on AVRs on this channel, like how they differ and complement each other?" I think there are a lot of videos that others have made about Magic Beans. I prefer to let other people review it and say whatever they want to say about it, because I'm very biased, right? So eventually I will probably have to do stuff like that, but it might be in the form of like tutorial type of, I don't know, tutorial style videos, more like lessons, right? About what it's doing, why it works, when it doesn't work, things like that. What's up, Marv? MW says, "Just get the Marantz for art, although it's not implemented as good as Storm Audio." Why do you say that? Like what about it don't you think is going to be implemented as well as Storm Audio? That's an honest question. Are you saying it's because of compute? Because I guess one way to look at it is, I can see why it would take a little bit more processing power, but keep in mind, when I was beta testing it, I was using it on a they sent me an audio interface, and I would run it on a computer. Like that's how the beta test went, and it was pretty easy to tell. Like I could look at the CPU usage and memory usage, and I don't recall it just like spiking up. When I used art versus Dirac Live or Dirac Live bass control, I didn't see anything significant. But of course, this is on a on a M1 Max, so much more powerful than what you would see on a AVR. So yeah, it's possible that it's because of that. But the way I thought about it was, it's not doing real time calculations, right? Like you would do the measurements, and then you would send it up to their servers to figure out what to process, and then you'd send it to your AVR. And the AVRs, they do have set number of taps when it comes to FIR filters, so they're limited in resolution, I guess you could say. I don't know what the setting is for Storm, and maybe that's what you're referring to. Maybe it just has more taps, so you can have better resolution or correction down to lower frequencies, things like that. Ole says, "I see. So do you think full manual calibrations professional versus Dirac, Odyssey, and Magic Beans?" I guess it depends on what you mean by professional calibration. Because not all professionals are the same. I think I'm good at calibrating. When I do car audio competitions, like, I won the car audio calibration or the SQ competition, but do I consider myself a professional? I guess if you make money from it, does that make you a professional? I don't know what deems, what does it require for somebody to be considered a professional, right? Because I was talking to people, calibrators at Cedia, that do get paid to do it. And when I asked them questions about what the process was, it was pretty simple. Not something that I would say what I would consider professional, right? To me, a professional is somebody who really takes pride in giving someone the best possible calibration that they know how to do. And the problem is, like, what does somebody know how to do, right? Like when I was talking to Anthony Grimani, right? He knows a ton. He's going to take measurements that other people don't take. He is, he really cares to get the best possible calibration that he knows how to do. And then I asked him, like, oh, so I mentioned Adam Pels, who does a lot of calibration for real big systems, Trinov, things like that. And he said, yeah, he's excellent, right? But these guys are on a different level when it comes to like what they would do. Like, even if you look at the tools that they bring into a calibration, probably going to be a lot more than what other people bring to calibrate, right? And same with me. Like, I'd bring this JL Audio Max with a 5 mic array, dual FFT. How many calibrators are doing that, right? If a calibrator comes in and just runs Odyssey or Dirac for you, that to me, that's not professional. And I don't, for most people, I wouldn't recommend that they pay for that. I mean, if somebody has no intention of doing it themselves, then sure, pay someone to do that. But I think you have to be careful about, who's a professional. Reverend Slim says more measurement data equals better averaging or weighting across the area measured. Yeah. And I think that's referring to, should he measure at multiple seats? Yeah, definitely for frequency response, it makes a ton of difference to measure in different locations. So with Magic Beans, we do take a moving mic average. So we're moving the mic around, and it's different. You can't do that with a normal measurement because they're using sweeps where the mic has to stay still. With a moving mic measurement, we're using pink noise, which is a constant, it's constantly playing a sound. And so you can use a moving mic measurement with those. And the idea is that we do want to get a spatial average, right? We want to get an idea what it does generally in this location. And we don't want it to be so specific to one tiny location, which doesn't make sense. A mic with a single measurement here. I mean, we even have 2 mics, right? 2 ears, so they're spaced apart differently, right? And the difference there could be significant. MW says Storm Audio has the taps needed for art. Marantz does not. Okay. I would like to know if you happen to know the number of taps that the Storm Audio has compared to Marantz. I would love to know that. And if you happen to know compared to the HTP1, which is what I have, I'm kind of curious about that also. So if you have that info, please let me know. BB Photo. He's responding to Ole. He says it depends on your budget and the knowledge of the person doing the calibration. Yeah. I think his Ole responded, says, true, but how close is it generally? Oof. How close is it generally? I think it depends on what you're using, right? You mentioned Dirac and Odyssey, right? In my experience, Odyssey, by default, doesn't do a great job. I mean, you might get lucky and it doesn't sound horrible, but just by default, I'm choosing Dirac every time if we're talking about default calibration, right? And I think for the most part, it does a pretty good job. If I had to just run Dirac on a system and they said, hey, you can only do auto calibration, I'll run Dirac and I think it'll sound pretty good. And how will it sound compared to somebody else who's doing it professionally? Well, it depends. Do they just do exactly what I just did? Because then the answer is they'll sound exactly the same. Are they going to do anything beyond that? I'm curious. I'm curious to see whether they would. But that's the reason why I would want to, talk to calibrators. I want to talk to more of them and see what their process is. Are they going in and trying to figure out a custom target curve and how? Hoey says I would enjoy vids that are about Magic Beans. All right. Chris Jordan says I recently purchased some Rance AV10 and AMP10 combo for $9,500. The set was originally purchased in March. Great deal, or no for a used product? I don't know the prices of those things. I mean, sounds like a healthy amount of money if you were to ask me. I don't know what the MSRP is on those. I don't usually pay attention to all those numbers. There's just too many for me to remember. If Chano were here, he'd remember. He knows all the prices. Josh says Denon is fine, but with Dirac, you can't modify speaker distance or speaker levels with my RCAM I have control. Yes. I mean, this is something we talk a lot about in our Discord group for Magic Beans. Is on my HTP one, I can run pre-EQ, right? So I have, I don't know how many bands of PEQ per channel, maybe 10 or so per channel, and I can have it so that if I add PEQs prior to running Dirac, then it'll look at the speaker as if it already had that frequency response, right? Or I can run it after I run Dirac, in which case it will, I can correct some of the things that Dirac does with frequency response, with the level, with delays. I still have full control, and that's why I like the HTP one so much. But yeah, definitely with with Denon, it locks you out. I think with my NAD T778, which was one of the first AVRs to get Dirac on there, and have Atmos, and that one also locks you out. So I don't like that. MW says Storm Audio has the hardware specs that meet the Dirac spec exactly, and Storm worked with Dirac to implement it properly. So it's not an accidental accident. Storm has that many taps. Okay. I mean, I believe that, I would expect that to have more processing power, but they didn't come out with a Storm hardware after Dirac Art, did they? Like, did they make something specific for it? Because I don't think so. Did they already have the product and then they added art to it? I don't know. Okay, True Voice of Reason just woke up. All right. Marv says, I have a multi-QX and wanted to try Magic Beans. Do I need the spatial audio calibration toolkit? You don't, I would say you don't need it, because we do provide pink noise via a streaming app, but you'd need to have an Apple TV. You'd need an iOS device or you need I think some of the new Macs, you can update it to the latest version, and you can get Atmos via the HDMI out. Yeah, I mean, there are ways to do it. If you have a Android TV, then you can download the app and you can play Atmos that way, but it's all streaming. And I would say for a lot of people, it's just easier. It's just easier to use the toolkit. If you have a Blu-ray player, you can just play the tracks. There's a menu, super easy. And we've just had fewer issues when it comes to that, just easier to figure out. Or if we have the digital version also, so you can just throw that onto a shield and play the test tracks that you need. So the only thing I would say is the advantage of the streamed pink noise that we provide is we do have one for center height and the top surround if you're using an Oro 3D layout. So if you don't have a way to stream those things, you can still calibrate, but you'd have to switch wires, right? For like the top surround, if we can't play a tone directly to it, then you'd have to switch a wire around and play surround and then access it that way. That's another reason why I like the HTP one so much, is you can play. They have built-in pink noise in there, but you can play a source. So I can play pink noise and then assign that to any channel I want. All right, so that makes it real easy. Okay, I'm gonna get out of here pretty soon. We're at an hour. Reverend Slim says, Marv, when you buy Magic Beans, you get a link to an app that can play the tones needed, and you can also use free tones that are provided by things like A1 Evo. Okay. MW could be wrong. Memory Storm Audio 3K taps per channel and 2K taps for Trinop. Whoa. So more on the Storm Audio? It's interesting. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it for right now. I answered some of your guys' questions. If you want to join the after show, you can go to crew.dailyhifi.com and join. We have a group chat that we do after every one of these shows. We have a Facebook Messenger chat that is it's pretty crazy in there. But we do know each other pretty well. And so when it comes to stuff like Cedia, I know all of these guys, and it feels like we've known each other forever when it comes to that. So when we see each other in person, it's really cool and it's not weird. But yeah, we hook each other up too. So if I have some extra stuff that I reviewed that, you know, maybe has been here for a few years and somebody wants it, you know, we can hook each other up that way. So yeah, it's good to be in the after show. You know, it's not for everybody, but if you're into that sort of thing, check it out, crew.dailyhifi.com, and you'll get access to that. I think that's it. That's it. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Sorry, no Chana or Aaron, but we'll try to have more people on next time, and maybe even get a guest on. We haven't had a guest on in a while, like you know, somebody. Let's say get Dan Romer on from Per Listen. That would be cool. Or who else? Who else would you guys want on? I mean, Trinov. We could get John Heron from Trinov on. Who else? We got so many people we could have on. I just need to invite them. So, all right. Anyway, you guys let me know in the comments if there's anybody you want us to have on our show, and we definitely can. Angela says, Fresh Hater Jay, he's always here. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.